Hi, welcome to A Healthier You After 40. We are connecting to learn natural approaches to hormone balance, increased energy, better moods, and maintaining a strong and healthy body. I'm Linda Lukovic, holistic coach and nutritionist, and I'm here with Dr. Jane Goehner. So Dr. Goehner is a licensed naturopathic doctor practicing in Oakville, and she's been practicing since 2001, I believe, Jane. Her own powerful experience of healing through natural treatments inspired her to choose naturopathic medicine as a profession. During her studies, I thought this was interesting. She worked as a student intern at the Toronto People AIDS Clinic, and this really sparked her passion to work with patients challenged with more chronic infections. And so I couldn't think of a better person to talk about gut health than Dr. Goehner. And she has been a really special part of my family's health team, and we've relied on her over the years. And she's just an amazing professional with the perfect balance of caring and professionalism, and let's get it done in a balanced way that's not too stressful. So I love her approach. I know that thousands of clients do as well. And so I'm really happy to have you here today. So we're going to dive into the topic, but first we would love to just hear a little bit more about you. I know I kind of skimmed over your journey and what got you into practicing. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit more about yourself and how you got into naturopath?
Yeah. So, certainly I came about this naturally. I always, was really interested in health and healing from a young age. I grew up in a family where we would see a naturopath when we were sick more often than we would see a traditional medical doctor. So I was really lucky to have that influence in my life at an early age. And I witnessed how that could have a real beneficial impact quickly in terms of, even more severe medical conditions. So, that really impacted my trajectory in terms of, wanting to go into the field of healthcare. And I've always been really, really fascinated by the immune system and then the microbiome and that interaction between all of those healthy microbes in the inside and outside world. And so that sort of, led to me studying science and biology in university and really focusing on healthcare. And I did my thesis on Alzheimer's disease, quantifying growth factors and in brains and comparing them. And so I really, enjoyed that science background, and then went on to study the naturopathic college in Toronto for my postgrad and did my naturopathic degree there. And then moving into clinic, it's just been a really nice, learning experience. I learned so much from my patients. So, over the years, I take my role as doctor, as teacher very seriously. And so, I really enjoy seeing families grow and get healthier. And then I learn from them as much as I feel like I share with them. So, I've really I think I'm in the right space in terms of my career, and I'm really pleased to be able to kind of share some information today about the microbiome and how we can really encourage that to be well throughout every hormonal stage in our lives.
That's wonderful. And, everyone here is super curious about this, is because other speakers have touched on it as well in their talks, like the bone health, everything. Everyone sort of touched on it a little bit, but we haven't really dove into it. So I thought we'd start with kind of a general question around, is there sort of a trend, like a theme in terms of what you see in some of your patients that are over 40, maybe in their 50s? Are there things that generally come up?
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm in that category now myself. And so, I also, I'm living this. So, certainly there are trends that we see as our hormones are starting to shift. And we're going to touch on each of those today. Certainly in our 40s, it's usually all about trying to really manage stress. The stress has a huge impact on our endocrine system and our digestion. So it's just such a busy time in our lives where we're juggling careers and families and, lots of outside demands that sometimes that opportunity for self-care and doing those things that really keep ourselves in balance, it just, we don't necessarily prioritize it. So that's something I see in the 40s really impacts hormones. So nourishing the adrenals, working on that stress management is really key. And then that sets you up for things being a little bit more of a smooth transition as you head into your 50s. So, it's doing that proactive work. I love it when patients come to me thinking that way, as opposed to waiting until they're having a lot of symptoms dealing with transitions. It's great if we can put a little gas in the tank before they get to that point that they're symptomatic. And we can always help. Certainly, there's going to be different symptoms people will have, regardless of how well they're looking after their bodies. And we can really, help mitigate some of those symptoms as well as improve, prevention in terms of any things that may come up as a result of those hormonal shifts moving beyond the 50s.
Right, right. And I think you really touched on something important there. And we have talked about adrenal health a lot. But I think, the fact that if you get to that early, I think that's really important, right? Because you can prevent some of these symptoms where some people sort of just feel like it's just part of being 40s, that you do have to go through that. But what we're saying is you really don't. There's a lot you can do to prepare your body to have a smoother ride. I say a less bumpy ride through perimenopause,
Yes,
right? Yeah,
yes.
right. Okay. So are there any other things that sort of impact the hormones when it comes to gut health? Like, do you want to talk a little bit about that gut brain connection a
Yeah.
bit, and then just what's happening with hormones and
Absolutely.
okay.
So just to kind of lay the groundwork for our talk, the microbiome is this huge living, breathing microorganism. It's a community of bacteria, parasites, virus, and fungi that they live together in harmony, ideally, right? And they're supposed to protect and benefit our bodies. And so the microbiome is sort of not one thing, right? So we're going to focus on the microbiome in the gut, but we have different little local microbiomes everywhere in our body, on our skin, in our mouth, for example. The oral microbiome is much different than the microbiome you'll find in your large intestine. So, each one of those little microcosms is unique and needs to be nourished. And there's things that we can do to really encourage the growth of the good flora, as well as discourage any ones that might be a little bit more pathogenic or might not give us as many nutrients and as much protection. So, that's sort of what we're really kind of focusing on in terms of our talk. And then there's a subgroup of bacteria within that microbiome in the gut specifically that we're going to talk about. And those species of bacteria, they help us recycle estrogen. So, the focus today is on hormone balance, and certainly estrogen is a big piece of that as we're walking through these different stages of perimenopause and menopause. And so that group of bacteria is responsible for helping us either activate and reabsorb estrogen that your body then excreted, or it can actually deactivate it and just allow it to pass through the bowel and not have an impact on your body. And so that can be good or bad, depending on what kind of situation you're in. So if you're in a very high estrogen situation, which can be common in perimenopause, or it can just be relatively high, given that the progesterone starts to come down at that stage. If you're already experiencing some levels of high estrogen, and symptoms might be things like PMS symptoms, so it could be mood changes, it could be bloating, it could be headaches, fatigue, irregular or heavy cycles, acne, for example. Those are all common things that you'll see if the estrogen is just maybe relatively a little high. So having a little too much of the beta-glucuronidase enzyme, which is actually reactivating estrogen in the bowel and allowing it to be recycled, that can increase those symptoms. Now, if you transition and you're now moving into, say, the 50s and the estrogen is coming down and it's quite low, we actually want to hold on to a little bit of those estrogens, ideally, and we want to reactivate them. So, if you're actually not having enough activity with the beta-glucuronidase and you're not activating some of those estrogens in the gut, the estrogen is very low. And conversely, you can have symptoms like fatigue, insomnia, libido, low, you can see basically low everything, right? Low bone density, et cetera. So, we want that balance, and we want to balance out those types of bacteria in the, they call the estrobolome. So those species collectively will help us recycle and manage estrogen.
That's incredible. Yeah. So I'm curious, like we talked a little bit about bioidenticals, some of the doctors, we have Dr. Krause, and how does gut health play into that? Like,
yes.
Yeah, because I'm curious. Yeah.
Absolutely, because it's bidirectional, right? So the hormones impact the gut function. And so we will see a direct impact as estrogen comes down and progesterone comes down. We'll see a decrease in gut motility quite often. And so you'll see more things in terms of maybe a sluggish bowel, bloating, constipation coming up for women. And we'll also see a decrease in diversity of the microbiome and the gut flora. So the estrogen actually plays a really really important role, and progesterone in terms of encouraging that nice healthy microbiome. And estrogen also really helps to keep the epithelial lining of the intestine intact, so you have less of a leaky gut, which then leads to general health. So I think that by using the bioidenticals, to support digestion, right? So if you're using those in appropriate doses and prescribed by a professional, that can actually help to strengthen your microbiome during those transition years if you're having low amounts of estrogen and progesterone that are being produced.
Interesting. Yeah, that is really interesting. So what would you say to someone who's maybe feeling like they're having sort of some gut issues, like some of the things you mentioned, and they don't really know what to do? Like, is there general testing that you would typically lean towards for that? Or do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I always have a pretty balanced approach. And so we'll always start simple, and then we'll add some testing in if we need to. And so typically, depending on what the symptoms are, we're going to be looking at diet first, and we're going to see if there's any food sensitivities or, a lot of processed foods or things that might be contributing to their symptoms. We're going to look at the digestive capacity. So something does happen sort of with every decade that we grow older, where we produce less hydrochloric acid and less digestive enzymes. And those are really the digestive fire. That's what helps us digest. But it also is really important to keep our microbiome healthy, because the hydrochloric acid produced by the stomach, that's your first line of defense from anything that's outside world, right? So when that goes down, then you're more likely to pick up some of these, less beneficial bacteria, et cetera, that can then become resident in terms of your microbiome. So we'll look at increasing hydrochloric acid production, and that can be very simple. We'll screen for zinc deficiency. So if you're low in that's something that's really important for the production of hydrochloric acid. So we can just increase it by bumping up zinc-rich foods or taking a zinc supplement. Foods that are sour or bitter will naturally stimulate the HCl and the enzymes. So we'll include those in the diet. And that might include some bitter greens like arugula, for example, or it might be some lemon or lime juice, just to try and stimulate that digestion with meals. And then digestive bitters are available to do that too. And so that's just a tincture that you take before meals to really train the body. As soon as your mouth tastes that bitter taste, it already starts getting the gallbladder moving the bile through, and it starts getting that HCl moving. So we want to address that piece for sure, and as naturally as possible. And before we kind of move on to tests, we'll kind of do some basic work there. And, certainly making sure we've got adequate amounts of pre and probiotic fibers in the diet to nourish the microbiome. But quite often, when patients are having digestive issues, they might already have been, for example, prescribed a PPI, or something to inhibit the acid production, or they may have been, taking antibiotics. I see many patients, post-H. pylori, which is a pretty intensive treatment they have to go through, right? So looking at the history will also inform what we're going to do in terms of treatment and testing moving forward. And so, if we've had, years of antacid and acid blocking medication use, right, that actually does shift the microbiome significantly. So we all have beneficial strains of E. coli, for example, as part of our microbiome. Most people associate that with food poisoning, and certainly there are some strains we don't want to have with us. But when you're continually taking acid blocking medication, that tends to shift those beneficial strains to a little bit more of a less beneficial strain within your gut, right? So there's changes that we see over time. And so those are things that we can measure by doing things like a stool analysis to see what changes are happening. And that's something that I've used for many years in my practice. And it's very non-invasive, which is nice, where you just collect the sample, and there's several labs that will either culture, or now they're using quantitative PCR probes to actually get a nice little overview, like a little bit of a fingerprint of what your microbiome looks like at any given time.
No, that's great. And I think it's really helpful for people to know that there are other ways to look at that, because sometimes if you go to your doctor and you have these complaints, sometimes the symptoms are very similar, aren't they, with low stomach acid and high stomach acid. And so that's why sort of people end up getting on these acid reducing products. And then in the end, it's not exactly what they needed. So so no, I think it's great for people to know that there's ways to actually measure that. So no, that's really helpful. So anything else you would want to really think about? Like, what can people do right now to improve their gut health?
Absolutely. So there's so many things that are within our control. And I always like to empower people to, just choose one or two things every day
Yeah.
that are manageable for you and make those changes. So I definitely suggest, number one, clean water is really important. So most
Right.
people get the idea that, we don't want to be having too many chemicals coming in through the water. And just a basic, even carbon block filter can deal with most of that. But certainly there's lots of patients that are thinking they're doing a good thing by drinking bottled water still, I find, and there can be more chemicals that are leaking into the water from those
Yeah.
plastic bottles if that's your only water source. So I think it's really important to have like clean containers to put your water in, either glass or stainless steel ideally, and then to have some sort of a filtration system. So that
Yeah.
really helps to nourish and keep your microbiome healthy because we're exposed to, low levels of antibiotic residues and all kinds of things through water that's not filtered, that when we're
Yeah.
ingesting that every day,
Yeah.
does have an impact on our microbiome. So
Yeah.
I think that's really basic and important. We know that having less processed foods in the diet, so basically more
Yeah.
plants and a bigger variety, will have
Right.
a healthier, more diverse microbiome. And I usually find most patients are doing a pretty good job when they come to see me of trying to eat more fruits and vegetables, but we're all creatures of habit. So
Oh,
we all
yeah.
tend to kind of buy the
The
same
same
things like the
ones.
apples,
Yeah.
like the
It's so
broccoli. And
true.
there's nothing wrong with broccoli,
Yeah.
but there's a whole world of brassica veggies out there. And some
Yeah.
of them have even more, strong and diverse compounds. And so
Yeah.
by eating a good variety, and so I always challenge people to, I give people a list and challenge them to like eat as many as they can, in
Right.
terms of that beneficial family. And so ones that are less known in terms of the brassica family that I love to recommend are things like arugula, bok choy. Cabbage is very underlooked. It's a
Yeah.
really amazing superfood. And I always recommend a combination of, if you can, of raw and cooked brassica veggies because you're getting different benefits from each one.
Right.
And if you're doing cabbage, you can choose red cabbage, and then you're getting that, powerful polyphenol punch from that too, which is really helpful in terms of nourishing the microbiome. So I usually recommend good variety, things like broccoli sprouts, Brussels
Yeah.
sprouts, and then with kale, different varieties of kale too, right? So always go the darker, the better. And I really like the Tuscan kale to
Okay.
recommend that particular one. And so making sure every day you're getting a good variety of those vegetables in. And there's also some fruits and vegetables that are natural sources of glucaric acid, which is something that really controls, if you have those high estrogen symptoms and you really feel like you need to control that recycling of the estrogen in the gut, including those foods in the diet is really helpful too.
Right.
So those are going to be your citrus fruits, apples, some legumes contain that as well. And then your brassica veggies have that too.
Right.
So, generally you can't go wrong with fruits and veggies, but there are specific ones that you can really focus on to help that
Yeah.
hormone health. The fiber is key, right? So
Yeah.
we want lots of fiber from the veggies, soluble fiber coming in through the diet too. And so the beta glucan that you can find in oats, for example, I usually recommend gluten-free oats because some people are sensitive, is a great source. Chia, for example, so ground chia if you're gut sensitive, the ground flaxseed, which most people are familiar with. Those sorts of fibers really help to encourage that gut health. They feed the healthy bugs in the microbiome, and they also will help in terms of grabbing onto any toxins and helping to excrete any excessive amounts of estrogen.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we actually want to capitalize on the fact that there are some phytoestrogens in the diet. So if you've kind of moved through that phase where the estrogens have been a little bit higher and you're having some of those symptoms and you're now in the low estrogen phase, where you may be seeing some symptoms related to the hot flashes, maybe there's been some change in bone density, frequent urinary tract infections, things like that, then we want to actually maybe get some of those phytoestrogen foods in the diet, right? And so that can include things like organic soy products, and things like lentils and chickpeas have some natural phytoestrogens in them that the gut microbiome can actually activate and allow your body to use to help minimize some of those symptoms. And I do have a lot of patients that are very afraid of using phytoestrogens in the diet,
Yeah.
because there's been a lot of
Yeah.
claims about soy, and certainly I think soy can be difficult. It can be an allergen for some people, and it has to be organic. So
Yes.
non-organic soy is not beneficial for us because of the very high modified levels of isoflavones. But the natural isoflavones that we get through food, I always explain, it's like a lock and a key with the estrogen fitting into that. The phytoestrogens will bump out those really strong estrogens from the environment, even our E2, our estradiol estrogen, and they'll take that place. So it will help take down the overall effect, and it will our bodies. So, those are foods that you can safely include in the diet if you tolerate them well and if you're showing symptoms of low estrogen.
Excellent. Wow, that's so informative. I'm sure. And the thing is, a lot of that's very realistic. It's very easy to do. Everyone can do that. You don't have to, have a ton of money, or you just have to.
It's like you just go to the grocery store, right? Or, a farmer's market, or, like a food share, whatever, just access that really good quality food and variety of it. And I love like the community agriculture shares and food shares, et cetera. Those are great because you're supporting local, and then often they're giving you that variety, right? Because you're getting whatever they're growing that week. Or same thing when you're at the farmer's market, you're getting what's in season, and not necessarily what just, was shipped up from a warmer climate.
Sprayed all the way up. So it's packed with nutrition. No, that's so true.
And then the pre and probiotics are huge too, right? So we have foods that contain fiber that will actually be really important fuel in terms of prebiotic fiber. And so those would be foods like bananas, and most people are familiar with onions and garlic are in that category. Eggplant, asparagus, avocado. There's many of those foods that we can include in our diet every day to nourish that microbiome. The root veggies as well. And in terms of root veggies, most of us will do like potatoes or sweet potatoes, right? And maybe the carrots, but I encourage people, parsnips, turnips, get a good variety of those in, because that's going to really, again, nourish the different levels of bacteria and the species. The probiotic foods. So, you can get lots of the good beneficial strains, and kefir is a really nice one because it's quite strong, and you can just do a tablespoon or two a day if you're starting. And it's also available in all kinds of non-dairy versions now, which is if you're sensitive. And same thing with yogurts. If you're sensitive to regular cow's milk yogurt, there's options in terms of, the sheep and coconut and all different plant-based types of yogurts now. I always recommend plain, and active bacterial cultures. But in addition to that, there's things like miso that you can include. The fermented veggies are wonderful. So just a forkful or two with your meal. You don't have to sit down to a full plate if you're new to that. But things like sauerkraut or kimchi, fermented pickles, right? Those are all good things to include to bring some more of those good guys, and really the quality.
No, that's really great advice. And it's interesting. I have a client who says she just craves sauerkraut. It's so interesting. Like when you're eating in a balanced way, like you really do start to crave the foods your body needs.
Yes. Just like if you're eating in an imbalanced way, you'll sometimes crave the ones that you don't
need.
I saw a little slogan once that said, "My microbiome made me eat it," right? Like sometimes when you have a real overgrowth of yeast or bacteria, that will contribute to the cravings on top of already some of those things that may happen as hormones are shifting. So I think, really nourishing that healthy microbiome does lead to those healthy habits, like you said.
Right. Exactly. Oh my gosh, you've been so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. That was just like a wealth of information. Do you have like just one final tip? Like if you had to pick sort of one thing that everyone should start doing right now to, I guess, promote their hormone health, what would that one thing be?
Yeah. You know what? It's hard to choose just one because it's going to be different for everyone, I think. But definitely the biggest piece in terms of hormone health, I would say, would be to shift to eating more of a plant-based diet, because we know that high fat, high sugar, high animal products will definitely increase those strains of bacteria that we don't want in terms of shifting hormones in the wrong direction. So if you were to make one change, it would be, and it doesn't mean necessarily if you're a person that really enjoys having some good quality animal products in the diet, doesn't mean dropping them out entirely. It just means maybe reducing the portion size, making sure they're really clean ones if you are having them, and then upping the amount of plant-based foods that you're doing. Or maybe you choose a couple, of nights a week or two or three that you're going to do a plant-based meal versus the animal-based products in the meals. But that is one of the most effective ways to shift the hormones quickly. And certainly, I always say, like, you cannot out supplement a good diet. You just, right? So if we don't have that basic building block to start with, no amount of DIM or any other supplement where you can put in to balance hormones is going to make up for that. So yes, those things are add-ons that are really helpful if we need them, but we want to start with the right foundation.
Right. Oh, that's an amazing way to finish this, Dr. Goehner. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think you've left everyone just so much to think about, and I'm sure everyone's super excited to go out and like pick up a new vegetable or a new fruit to try as they go shopping. Now, I know I am. So thank you so much. Actually, do you want to tell everyone about the freebie that you're offering?
Sure. Yes. So we have a free discovery call with the clinic, and so you're welcome to call and learn more about gut health. And we have a really nice handout all about healing the gut and nourishing the microbiome that will have a lot of those tips that we discussed today on the handout.
Wonderful. All right. And we're going to put that link below like usual. And we'll see you guys back in the Facebook group to learn more. Thanks for joining us. And thank you so much, Dr. Goehner.